Imagine waking up one morning and everything looks normal. The streets are still there. The buildings haven't disappeared. People are still going to work. But something feels different. You walk into a store and half the shelves are empty. The things that are still there are suddenly much more expensive. Your parents go to the bank and their card doesn't work the way it used to. Your country hasn't been invaded. There are no soldiers in the streets, no explosions, no warplanes overhead. And yet, day by day, things begin to break down. Factories slow down, then stop. Hospitals start running out of medicine. Fuel becomes harder to find. Businesses begin to close, jobs disappear, and the country starts to feel smaller, isolated, cut off. This is what economic sanctions look like. Because in today's world, you don't always need an army to hurt a country. Sometimes you just need to disconnect it. This is economic sanctions. Explain like you're 5. Let's make this very simple. Imagine you're in school. Every day, you and your friends share things. You trade snacks, you borrow pencils, you help each other with homework. Now imagine one day, everyone decides they won't interact with you anymore. They won't share. They won't trade. They won't talk to you. You're still there. Nothing physically has changed. But suddenly, life becomes harder. You can't get what you need. You can't participate in activities. You're isolated. That is what sanctions are. Now take that same idea and scale it up to countries. Countries don't share toys. They share something much bigger. They trade food. They trade oil. They trade machines, technology, and medicine. They rely on each other. And most importantly, they are connected. The world today is like a giant network. Every country is connected through trade routes, banking systems, and supply chains. Ships carry goods across oceans. Banks move money across continents. Companies depend on parts made in other countries. No country stands completely alone. Think about a single smartphone. The screen might come from South Korea, the chips from Taiwan, the minerals from Africa, the software from the United States, and it's assembled somewhere in Asia. One product, many countries. That is how deeply connected the world has become. And that's where sanctions come in. Sanctions don't destroy a country directly. They don't break buildings. They don't remove governments. Instead, they cut connections, they restrict trade, they block money, they isolate the country from the global system. And once enough connections are cut, everything begins to slow down. So why use sanctions at all? Why not just go to war? Because war is costly. It destroys cities, it costs lives, it can last for decades, and it can spiral out of control. Sanctions offer another option. They allow countries to apply pressure without fighting. They are meant to force change, to push governments to change policies, stop certain actions, or weaken their power. At least, that's the idea. But who actually decides to impose sanctions? Sometimes it's one powerful country acting alone, like the United States, placing sanctions on another nation. Sometimes it's a group of countries acting together, like the European Union or the United Nations. When many countries agree to sanction one country, the pressure becomes much stronger because there are fewer places left to turn. There are different types of sanctions. Each one targets a different part of a country's system. Trade sanctions block what a country can buy or sell. For example, a country is banned from exporting oil or importing machinery. This directly affects the economy because countries depend on trade to survive. Financial sanctions target money. Banks may be cut off from global systems. Transactions can be blocked. Foreign reserves can be frozen. Without access to global finance, a country struggles to function. Sometimes specific industries are targeted: oil, technology, military equipment, agriculture. If a country depends heavily on one industry, this can be devastating. Asset freezes target individuals. Leaders and officials often keep money abroad. Sanctions can freeze that money. They can't use it. They can't move it. Travel bans restrict movement. Certain individuals are banned from entering other countries. This is meant to make leadership uncomfortable, to make those in power feel the consequences personally. Because often, the goal is not to hurt the whole country. It is to pressure the people making decisions. Now let's look at what actually happens, step by step. First, trade slows down, imports become difficult, food becomes scarce, fuel becomes expensive, essential goods become harder to find. Second, money stops flowing. Banks struggle to send or receive payments. Businesses can't operate normally. International trade becomes complicated or impossible. Third, businesses suffer. Factories depend on imported parts. When those parts don't arrive, production stops. Fourth, jobs disappear. When businesses slow down, workers are laid off. Unemployment rises. Fifth, prices rise. With fewer goods available, prices increase. Inflation begins. The same amount of money buys less and less. Sixth, confidence collapses. People lose trust in the system. Investors leave. The economy weakens further. And seventh, the currency loses value. When people lose confidence in a country's economy, they stop trusting its money. The local currency becomes worth less, sometimes worth almost nothing. And suddenly, everything imported becomes impossibly expensive. Take Iran as an example. For years, it has faced heavy sanctions. Its oil exports were restricted. Its banks were cut off from global systems. The result? Its currency lost enormous value. Prices increased dramatically. People struggled with rising costs every single day. Medicines became difficult to import. Simple everyday goods became luxuries. The country still exists. The government is still there. But life for ordinary people became much harder. More recently, sanctions were placed on Russia. After the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Western countries responded quickly. Banks were removed from global payment systems. Foreign companies left almost overnight. Assets were frozen. International brands closed their doors. Almost overnight, Russia became more isolated from the global economy than it had been in decades. And yet, Russia adapted. It found new trading partners. It redirected its oil to other buyers. Which brings us to an important question. Do sanctions actually work? Here's something most people don't realize. The real power behind sanctions is the global financial system. Most international trade happens in US dollars, and much of it passes through systems controlled by a few powerful countries. That means if you are cut off from that system, you are cut off from a large part of the world economy, because modern countries are deeply connected. No country produces everything it needs. Everyone depends on someone else. Sanctions exploit that dependence. But sanctions are not perfect. Sometimes they fail. Countries adapt. They find new partners. They trade with countries that don't follow the sanctions. Black markets grow. Goods still move, just in hidden ways. History shows mixed results. Sometimes sanctions have helped bring countries to the negotiating table. They contributed to ending apartheid in South Africa. They pressured Libya into giving up its weapons program. But in other cases, governments held firm. They blamed outsiders for the suffering and used it to rally their own people. And often, ordinary people suffer more than leaders. This creates a difficult question. Are sanctions really better than war? Because while they avoid bombs, they can still cause suffering. Food shortages, medical shortages, economic hardship, children who don't get enough nutrition, patients who can't access medicine, workers who lose everything. And often, the people affected the most are not the ones making decisions. Some argue that this makes sanctions deeply unfair. Others argue that even with suffering, they are still better than the destruction of war. There is no easy answer. It is one of the hardest questions in international politics today. Economic sanctions are not about destruction in the traditional sense. They are about pressure. Slow, persistent, invisible pressure. If war is like breaking down a door, sanctions are like locking every door and waiting. In a world where everything is connected, power is no longer just about weapons. It is about access. Access to trade, access to money, access to systems. And when that access is taken away, a country doesn't collapse instantly. It fades. Slowly, quietly, and often without a single shot being fired. The next time you hear about sanctions on the news, remember the school analogy. Remember the empty shelves. Remember the currency losing value. Remember that somewhere, real people are waking up and finding life a little harder than it was yesterday. Because in today's world, the most powerful weapon might not be a missile. It might just be a disconnection.